What if your wedding night began not with flowers or music, but with a broom? Not to sweep, not to clean, but to bruise. In the shadowy corners of rural Russia, there once existed a tradition so bizarre and brutal it was spoken of only in whispers, Snochactwo, a word that sounds innocent enough, but hides generations of pain and silence. This was not folklore, this was a real custom, practiced across parts of eastern Poland, Belarus, and deep rural Russia, where the patriarch ruled the home, and the new bride was not just entering marriage. She was entering a system of male entitlement. In families where several generations lived under one roof, the young groom's father, the tesk, was often considered the true head of the household. And when a new bride arrived, it was not always the groom who laid claim first. It was the father. The term Snochactwo comes from the word Snocha, meaning daughter-in-law. But what it really implied was that she belonged to the house, and that house was ruled by the elder. In many villages, the father-in-law believed it was his right to test the new bride, to inspect her, dominate her, even punish her physically or sexually before handing her off to his son. And this horror wasn't always done behind closed doors. Sometimes it began with a symbolic gesture, beating the girl with a broom in the bathhouse. The excuse was cleansing, purification, a folk ritual to chase away evil. But in truth, it was a message, a warning, a demonstration of power. The girl, often barely 16 or 17, was stripped of privacy and protection. Her own husband could do nothing, sometimes because he was afraid, sometimes because he had grown up believing this was normal. Mothers and sisters-in-law watched silently, powerless, conditioned to accept what had once happened to them. The broom was just the beginning. Afterward, the girl might be ordered to serve food, wash feet, or clean up after her new family, immediately, on her wedding night. No gifts, no affection, just submission. What's even more chilling is that in some regions, villagers saw this as protective. The idea was that by breaking in the girl early, the father-in-law was ensuring she would not challenge the family structure. Some claimed it was to test her loyalty. Others whispered it was to satisfy older men's secret desires under the guise of tradition. Either way, the result was the same. The girl's body became community property. Her voice vanished, and this wasn't ancient history. Snochactwo was still reported in isolated parts of Russia and Eastern Europe well into the 20th century, and some stories still surface today, tucked in the pages of local folklore collections or police records from remote districts. In Part 2, we'll dig deeper into the roots of this terrifying tradition, explore how it was justified, and uncover whether echoes of Snochactwo still linger in modern-day rituals or cultural silence. To understand how a tradition as cruel as Snochactwo could take root, you have to go back to the beating heart of rural village life, where isolation wasn't just geographic, it was cultural. These were places where roads turned to mud half the year, where literacy was rare, and where the word of the oldest man in the house was law. Religion and superstition mixed freely. And in that world, marriage was not a romance. It was a transaction, a pact between families, and a reorganization of labor. The girl was often married off not because she loved anyone, but because her family needed fewer mouths to feed or sought the security of an alliance. And once inside her new home, she belonged to it completely. That's where Snochactwo crept in, not as a sudden act of violence, but as a slow corrosion of agency. People didn't question it because it wasn't considered strange. The father-in-law, often referred to as Chozain, the master, was the patriarch. He worked the land, built the home, fed the animals. He had earned his dominance. And what was a young girl compared to all that? Just another addition to the property. Even worse, some believe that a bride who resisted was cursed. There are reports of women who fled their homes on the wedding night, only to be dragged back by their own families, shamed for dishonoring the house they had entered. If you can't obey the father, how will you obey the son? They were told. The broom used in the bathhouse wasn't just a symbol of purity, it was a weapon of compliance. It taught the bride from the very first moment that her pain meant nothing if it preserved order. The bathhouse, or banya, was more than a place to wash. It was sacred, spiritual, and that made what happened inside it even more twisted. Sometimes the bride was scalded with steam before the beating, her skin red and raw. Then the broom came, birch branches tied together and soaked in hot water. The lashes weren't always light. Welts were not uncommon. But she wasn't allowed to cry. Crying showed weakness. Crying embarrassed the family. She was expected to take it in silence, just as her mother had, just as her grandmother had, and all the while, women around her would nod in approval. "She's strong," they would say. "She'll be a good wife." The complicity was generational. They didn't question, because questioning would mean confronting their own buried pain. This wasn't just patriarchy. It was a cycle of inherited submission. It's important to remember, this didn't happen in every house, nor was it written into law. But the fact that it was accepted, normalized, even praised in some circles, speaks volumes about how deeply cruelty can hide behind the mask of tradition. In Part 3, we'll hear true accounts from women who lived through it, those who stayed silent, those who fled, and those who fought back against the shadow of Snochactwo. Their voices are the missing pieces of a history too long buried. They were daughters, wives, daughters-in-law, but almost never people. For the women who endured Snochactwo, silence wasn't just expected, it was enforced. Many never spoke a word of what happened to them until decades later, if ever. But some, against all odds, left behind their voices in journals, in interviews, or whispered memories passed to granddaughters who dared to ask. One such story comes from a woman named Olga, from a tiny village in Smolensk Oblast. Married at 16, she described her first night in her new home not with warmth but with dread. "I remember the broom," she said. "It was left near the stove like it always was, but that night they boiled water and soaked it. My mother-in-law poured the water. My father-in-law told me to undress." She paused. "I had no name in that house. They called me Snoka. Just Snoka. I wasn't Olga anymore." Her voice cracked when she said the worst part wasn't the pain. It was how normal everyone acted afterward. They laughed. They ate, they danced, and she served them food with her hands still shaking. Then there was Valentina, from a border village between Ukraine and Russia. Her story was different. She never accepted it. When her father-in-law approached her in the night, she struck him with a pan and fled barefoot into the snow. She walked for hours until a passing horse cart picked her up. "They called me cursed," she said, "but I would rather be cursed than silent." Her case was rare. Most girls had nowhere to go, no family that would believe them, and no village that would protect them. The system was airtight. Even the local priests turned a blind eye. "It's not our business," they would say, "that's family." But as the Soviet Union grew more powerful and centralized, whispers of Snochactwo reached state ears. Officials, eager to modernize and erase feudal customs, began documenting the practice in ethnographic reports, sometimes with disgust, other times with morbid fascination. In some areas it was declared illegal, but enforcement was nearly impossible in remote regions. Fear and loyalty ran deeper than any government order. Some folklorists began collecting the songs and sayings of village women, tiny fragments of their pain coded in rhyme and metaphor. One song, recorded in 1952, spoke of a girl who cried in the banya but smiled at the table. Another warned future brides to, quote, "close their hearts and open their eyes." The trauma didn't always stay hidden. Many of these women grew old with chronic pain, unexplained illnesses, or deep emotional scars. Some never allowed their daughters to marry. Others watched helplessly as the cycle repeated. And then there were those who forgave, but never forgot. They understood, perhaps better than anyone, how powerful a tradition can be when it wears the mask of duty. In Part 4, we'll ask the hardest question of all. Does Snochactwo still exist today? Not in name, maybe, but in spirit. In the power dynamics of modern families, in silence expected from women, in rituals no one questions just because they've always been done that way. You won't find Snochactwo listed in any modern wedding guide. No official pamphlet will explain how to prepare the broom, how to heat the bathhouse, or how to make a girl forget her name on her first night as a wife. But that doesn't mean it's gone. Like many dark traditions, Snochactwo didn't vanish. It changed its shape. Today, in many rural corners of Eastern Europe, echoes of the practice remain, not in visible scars, but in words, expectations, in the quiet lessons passed from mother to daughter behind closed doors. Take the phrase still heard in some villages: "The bride must be broken before she can serve." No one says what that means exactly, but the silence around it speaks volumes. Or the tradition of locking the bride in a room with her in-laws on the first night while the husband drinks with guests. It's not called Snochactwo anymore. It's called honoring the elders, respecting custom. And yet the fear in a girl's eyes tells another story. In some households, the broom still appears, not in the bathhouse, but as a symbol, a threat, a reminder. Not to speak too loud, not to challenge, not to say no. But it's not just about tools or rooms anymore. It's about power. About a structure where the young woman has no voice, and everyone pretends that's normal. And that's where the trauma hides, in the normalization. Because when something cruel becomes expected, it stops looking cruel. It becomes invisible. And invisible pain is the hardest to heal. Modern psychology has begun to uncover what folklore kept hidden. The women who endured Snochactwo often developed anxiety, depression, even post-traumatic stress, decades before these terms were ever used in those regions. And tragically, many passed those burdens onto their children. But something is changing. The internet. Education. Braver conversations. More women are speaking up, sometimes anonymously, sometimes boldly. They're asking hard questions about their grandmothers, their wedding nights, about what was called tradition but felt like violation. And they're teaching their daughters something different, that love is not pain, that respect is not silence, that marriage should never begin with fear. This isn't just a Russian story, it's a human one. Because every culture has its shadows, and every generation must choose whether to live in them or shine a light. So the next time you hear someone romanticize old customs, ask what they really mean. Ask who they served and who they silenced. The bathhouse is empty now. The broom rests in the corner. But the question remains, who will pick it up next? And will anyone finally say no?